Welcome to the Minx and Muse podcast. I'm your host, Crimson Minx, creatrix of Minx and Muse, a dark feminine playhouse where we awaken our innate magic through esoerotic dance and witchcraft. Welcome to the portal of enchantment. Welcome to the Minx and Muse podcast. And today is the first of a future ongoing series that we are calling our Q&A discussion. So essentially we bring on a witch from the studio or from the online virtual community, and they bring the questions and we have discussions around it. So welcome to our first Q&A guest, Megan.
Hello, Crimson. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm a huge fan of the pod.
Long-time listener, first-time guest. I love it. Well, this was all inspired by you because you had reached out to me like maybe a month ago with some questions, and we always talk spiritual things. And I was like, wait, Megan, this would be really cool if we actually did a podcast where we just talked about this in live time.
So glad my spiritual crises to be podcast series. Love that.
And here we are. So, Megan, what was kind of the prime question that you were bringing to the table to kick off our discussion?
Oh my God. I was actually thinking about that. Like, how would I really boil down all the questions that I had? Because I probably had 30 of them that I sent your way after our initial conversation. And I think at the root of it, it was really trying to understand how to walk a non-linear spiritual path. And I think I have been thinking a lot about that because for me, and maybe it's very common for others, to kind of find your path. You find your people, your coven, your belief system, and you feel really good about it and things are working really well. And then life hits you and you start to question things and you start to calibrate how you think about things, and maybe puts a little bit of doubt in you and you start to wonder, is there more to this, or am I thinking about this correctly? So I think for me, it was really coming down to, am I on the right path? What is the right path? What is the right step? How do I know if I'm on that right path? So yeah, it was kind of like a big macro question that I was like, hey, Crimson, can you answer this in one voice message back to me?
And I was like, well, first and foremost, which I should have shared at the beginning, I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
You don't have all the answers. None of us have all the answers. So I don't want to set up this podcast you're bringing a question and I'm on the up top of a mountaintop and being like, I have your answers.
Yeah.
I don't. Yes. And and anyone who tells you that they have all of your answers is probably someone you should be skeptical of, because right, who knows all of the answers around spirituality?
Yeah.
There's so much not to know. There's so much mystery around it that I'm always very hesitant to follow people who think that their answer is the one and only answer.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Finding one person that you're like, this is my Messiah, this is my Jesus, this is the one person who knows all. I think that's what makes our spirituality feel very rigid. And I have questions about that too. But yeah, I'm trying to figure out, how do I navigate this non-linear path while taking in all of these inputs and making it feel resonant and like my own. And it's a hard walk sometimes. Some days you're like, this is great. And other days you're like, oh, why? Why did I choose to be a spiritual being?
I know. And I feel like the thing that came to my heart first was this delusion that a lot of us, and I'm not saying you're delusional, I think that we all have, I'm not saying you're not delusional. No, I'm just kidding. But I think one thing that really draws us into spirituality in the first place is the idea that it's the answer to leading an easy life. And I think that that's a promise that just can't be made through any spiritual practice. But I think it's easy for people to say, I'm going to become a witch, or I'm going to become Christian, or I'm going to become a ceremonial magician so that I can be the one that gets to make all of the decisions in my life and to make those decisions in a way that avoid any kind of discomfort.
Yeah.
Yes,
What
or
people bypassing in that? It's like I want to look a certain way and talk a certain way, and I'll do certain rituals and I'll talk to certain people. But at the end of the day, doing the work for myself, like the icky, shadow work stuff that feels really uncomfortable and is going to require me to probably go to therapy a little bit to work through some of that. Yeah, people don't want to sit with it. And I'm not saying I love sitting with it either, but I can't get to the other side. None of us can get to the other side of those things unless we sit with that discomfort. And unfortunately, that's just part of the gig.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you have come to that conclusion, because I think a lot of people jump ship really early on in certain spiritual practices
Yeah.
when things don't go their way. Well, became, this belief system because I thought all of a sudden my life would be easy. I would get my dream job. I'd find my dream relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I would live in my dream home. Everything would be easy. I'd be living in peace. Like, I think a lot of spiritual practices that aim for peace,
Mm-hmm.
there could be this illusion that there the entire process to get to peace is peaceful. And it's like,
Yeah. No, it took me quite a while to realize that whenever I would ask spirit or the universe for peace, I thought it was like they would just make all the bad things kind of stop. As opposed to, oh, you want peace? I'm going to give you this scenario that's going to be very uncomfortable, and then you get to figure out where you find peace in navigating that. So the more I ask for support, the more I'm given these scenarios or these circumstances or these hurdles to kind of figure out, how do I want to engage with this? How do I want to show up in this? And that is really where I'm tested. And that is where people fall off. And that's where I've fallen off, where I'm like, flip the table. I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm out. But sticking with it
right.
is hard.
And we talked about how it's okay to sometimes say, I'm stepping back from my spiritual practice right
Oh,
now, because I think a lot of us can get so deep into it that we start to replace our humanity.
yeah.
And I'm always an advocate for, we are here to have both earthly and spiritual experiences,
Yeah.
but it should be rooted in our earthly self.
Mm-hmm.
So much spirituality teaches us that we need to transcend the body
Yeah.
and earthly desires. And I think a lot of toxic purity culture comes from that, and a lot of shaming. Or I think, like you had mentioned before, like bypassing spiritual lessons that are taught through earthly
Yeah.
experiences. And so part of, I think, a lot of people, when we start spiritual practices, it is a tower moment. And I remember when I really started getting into like
Mhm.
committing to my witchy work. Like, I'm
Yeah.
a witch. I, am the ultimate creatrix of my life. It was a full tarot moment of, oh, okay,
Yep.
well, so you lost this, you're not going to end up with this person.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to actually deal with this thing that you have been avoiding for 30 years or whatever.
Too
And so,
long. Yeah.
yes. And so it seems like, oh my gosh, I came into this spiritual practice to get everything. I think in witchcraft, a lot of people are like, I want to start doing spells to get things. I
Yep.
want to make lots of money. I want to find my soulmate.
Yep.
I want to get that house. Or I want to get back at someone, which is like even less developed, where it's like, oh
Yeah.
my goodness, there's way too much wrapped up in that. And then you have to, and a lot of people will leave it at that. And
Yep.
then when they're not getting what they want, because that's not like the ultimate pursuit of witchcraft, they'll kind of find something else,
Yeah.
right?
Or
Whereas,
they do the thing where, and I've been guilty of this at some point, where you find a path or you're witchy people and you're like, okay, I'm going to read all the things. I'm going to consume all the stuff. And I'm just going to, and there's no integration of the things that you're consuming. And you're just like, okay, well, I'm going to read all these things. What does it look like in practice? Or how does that feel in my body? Or what happens when I try it and it doesn't work the way that I read that it was going to work? And then now who am I? Where am I going? What am I doing? So there's this act of doing too much, too fast, too soon, and not really embodying the things that you're so attracted to.
wow, yes, that is such a good point, because that's so Age of Aquarius right now. Everyone thinks they're experts
Oh my
because
God.
they read a book or listened to a podcast, and you know, of course, we've all been there, especially if you were ever in your young 20s, you probably thought you knew everything. That was the time in
Well,
our
much
life.
less now than I did in my 20s, I will tell you.
Yes, it's so funny. Like, we can all relate to thinking we know all the things because we all were just at an age where that is like the point in life where we move to. No shade to anyone in the early 20s, but
Yeah.
the older you get, you realize, wow, I thought I knew everything.
Yep.
And I've just scratched the surface. And so it's always so important that when you do this work, you are integrating and embodying it, because how many like I'm a yogi and peace and love, and then like, but you'll see them going on a tirade on social media on someone, and you're like, that does not seem to be practicing what we
Their
preach.
profile and they're like
Yeah.
spiritual guru. Like something's not adding up the right
Yeah.
way.
Right. Unless you trigger them on something. And it's like, obviously, we're all going to be triggered. We're all going to have like human expressions that we're less than proud of. But like, that's why also it's super important that we remember to integrate and embody the things that we're learning before we then go to the next thing. Because like you said, it's like it's a rabbit hole. We get so excited and you're like, I just want to go on to the next thing. Tell me. People will actually, we talked, I was on Nicole Ricardo's podcast, The Real Ghosts of, a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about how, for me, the ultimate spell that we cast as witches is how we live through our mundane life, because that's where all of the work that we do is put into embodiment.
Yeah. Where you're just you don't think about it anymore. It's just like who you are. It's how you engage with the things in your life that are either tangible or non-tangible. It's the things that you wake up and you're like, this is just not just true, but my truth. And that's very
Right.
it takes time to cultivate. That takes time to get to that place. And although I think I'm at that place, I'll probably wake up tomorrow or in 6 months or a year from now and being like, I certainly was definitely not in that place. So there's this constant evolution and recalibration of the spiritual path. And I think that's really where I was getting tripped up. It's like, oh man, I felt so good in my path. And now I have all these questions and I'm clearly like not embodying the things that I thought I was embodying because I have all these questions now. So where do I go from here? And then you mentioned the tower moment, which is kind of something I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, especially as it relates to surrendering and having faith. And I think, and you probably experienced this, but sometimes before a big manifestation, like a bunch of hard things or bad things happen to us all at once, and that tower moment starts to feel like a tower season that just never seems to end. It's like Texas, we don't have seasons here. Really test our faith. And sometimes like, meeting resistance is a sign that maybe we're not on the right path or the ideal path. But sometimes meeting a lot of resistance or hard things is an indicator that something big's about to happen to us. So how do we discern that? How would you discern that?
That's a great question. Well, personally, the way that I try to look at things like that is, you used the word before, surrender. And that's been a big word that I've had to learn to embody this year, because I am someone who likes to bulldoze through, I am the energy that controls the energy.
Yeah.
And, what I fail to recognize when I say that sometimes is like, including your own and including the energy that is happening around you, no matter what your will would prefer.
Yeah.
And so I always like to take a step back, because there's always things going like completely awry at any point in time in our lives, because we're humans. And we've talked about this before of like, yeah, we may be the energy that can control the energy in the world around us. However, everyone else is also showing up as energists, and free will is going to not allow you to control how other people are in other circumstances. So it is always going to come back to us and say, it's almost like all of these spiritual tools, when we can shift our minds away from they're used to get me what I want, and instead shifting into, these are tools to make my journey through life more pleasurable
Mhm.
and less emotionally taxing.
Yeah.
So instead of like, oh, okay, I'm a witch because I get everything I want.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a witch, so I have all of these tools and do all of this work so that when bad things inevitably happen, they don't affect me and I don't crumble.
Yes.
Um, right?
Don't fall
And
apart at the bad thing that just happened, because you know and trust yourself that you have the tools at your disposal to help navigate that tricky situation, or at least self-soothe through that situation. Yes.
And those situations are going to be less trying if you are doing that internal work that we always talk about in the multiverse, and that makes some use of this dark feminine work of the shadow and knowing thyself at a deeper level.
Mhm.
I think without these tools in our witchy tool belt, that we'll never be able to release triggers. We'll never be able to release like feeling like we're out of control, because you start to understand, why am I reacting this way?
Exactly. Yeah. And that nothing's, most of the time, it's not really about you in the first place. Like, we're reacting to
Right.
something that is a reflection of us. And it's actually very beautiful to think of it as like, this reaction is telling me something about me. It's data. It's something I can action on. I can do something with, as opposed to something that makes me a victim and like, life is just happening to me. I mean, I fall into that. Of certainly, I'm a human. Of course, I'm just like,
Right.
why, spirit? Why are these things happening to me? I'm so innocent. I've done nothing wrong. But at the end of the day, I like to really believe that things are happening for me and not to me. And just like kind of trusting to surrender, it takes time to cultivate that mindset. And you have to remind yourself of that, especially in those icky tower moments that feel really hard to sit in.
And that's why you'll see the same situation happen to two different people,
Mm-hmm.
and them respond or react in different ways, and then their life manifest around them in two completely different ways just based on that one thing. So we think it's not that, oh, if you get a really good spiritual practice, you no longer have to feel pain or experience
Right.
unsavory human experiences. It's just that if it happens to you and you've done your spiritual work and your witchy workings,
Mm-hmm.
then as they happen, you can take it in stride, and you can see it, and you can see it as a guiding
Yeah.
like light in front of you. Oh, okay. Because I do believe what you said too, that when things are not working out for me easily and effortlessly, I always take a step back and I say, what is going on right now?
Mm-hmm.
That I'm giving it's very Saturnian. It's very like given an opportunity to really dot your I's, cross your T's, make sure you're taking in all the information, because every time I have not done that, and I've pushed through or I've ignored the signs that like this is not
Yeah.
this seems to be like a little creaky, it
Yeah.
it falls apart, right? And so that's where peace comes from. The peace of, this isn't working out for me,
Yeah.
and I'm going to start exploring other options, and not, it's non-resistance, right? I'm going to release this hold on this thing that I think
Mm-hmm.
I need or deserve. And I'm going to just release and have a little non resistance, allow myself to find a little flow, a little surrender, and see if I do have that spirit connection and that understanding of myself at a deeper level, where I'm guided next.
Yep. I love that. Especially because when we don't listen to those signs that are saying like, hey, it's not working out so hot, like release your grip a little bit. Like, there's other options, there's other things that are coming in for you if you just release that energy. Especially because if we don't do it, like, I'm a firm believer that spirit will find a way to kick your ass and
Yeah.
go. I've had so many situations in my life where I'm like, I'm not going to listen to this sign. I'm not going to look at this sign. I'm like holding on. I'm like, if I just pretend that it's not there, and eventually it'll pass. And spirit's like, fine, you can ignore the sign, but at some point you're going to get a nudge. And so either you can take your free will and release and be open to receiving something new, or there's going to be some type of spiritual, tango where you're eventually going to you're going to get pushed a little bit into a different timeline, or to face the thing that you don't really want to face because it's uncomfortable, or it's requiring that you grow. And it's not easy to sit in that.
So true. Like we forget that without difficulty, without discomfort, we cannot grow and we cannot expand. And that is part of any spiritual journey is growth. And we grow through experiencing things that challenge us.
Absolutely.
And to be able to like have that perspective of this is part of the work, not this is my work not working.
Mm-hmm. Yep, this is part of the work is me not work. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hear from you on this, and I feel like I've been so privileged to hear so much from you over the last few years at Minx. But do you have like a story where you surrendered to that higher power that led to a super transformative outcome, where you finally just like let go of the thing and you're like, fine, I just trust that this thing will happen, and then next thing you know, you're doing something completely different. Like the world is totally different because you let go.
Yeah. And I would say it's the first thing that came to mind. And I think a lot of people who listen to this could relate is a work thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of us are, trying to figure out careers and all of that. And this actually happened before my really witchy awakening. But back in, I was at a job in I guess I was my mid to late 20s. And, um, but I was hell bent like this was the job. It was a very prestigious design studio in Soho, New York. And it was like what I had gone to school for and what I, was like, it took me a few jobs to get there, but I got it. And I was miserable every stinking day. And I clung to that job and I would cry in the bathroom. And eventually, like, there was just so many opportunities to leave and I didn't. And then I did the crash happened in 2008. So I got let go, which was a gift, which,
at the time,
who would have thought that losing your job was a gift? And during that time, I was just not able to find any other jobs in this like prestige design studio. Like, no one was hiring. I was in architecture. So it was like, that was all stalled because of the banking situation in New York. And so I finally, oh my gosh, you don't even know. I was like forcing my way and trying. And when I just let go, my friend was like, "Oh, just come work at my agency, at like an ad agency," and that was my first foray into like full-time freelancing, where I finally got into being able to make a lot more money and having a lot more fluidity and experience in my work. And it's so funny that at the time I just think of losing my job. I was like, oh my gosh, this is tragic. But what I realized that with the universe now looking back, 20 years later, being like, oh my gosh, that forced me to become a full-time freelancer, which allowed me to then start my business, Minx Muse, and a lot of things happened in between there, obviously. But like, I was just having a conversation with someone yesterday of how people don't realize I worked part-time as a freelance art director until 2021, like 3 or 4 years into owning the studio, which what a freaking gift.
Yeah.
Because I would not have been able to do the studio if I didn't have that skill. And so that's a really silly example, but like something where I was like, I really thought I was climbing the corporate ladder to be like a creative director in New York City. And the universe said, and it was actually at that job that I finally surrendered and just took a freelance gig at my buddy's firm that I met someone who said to me, I feel like you would love LA. And I never in my life before that considered, I never even thought about LA in my life. 6 months later, I lived there.
Wow.
And and within that year of me moving there, that's where I found my witchy path. That's where I found my sensual dance and all that. None of that could have happened in New York.
If you didn't get laid off, if the
exactly.
Or 2008 happened. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like, it's funny.
So hard. It probably felt so uncomfortable. And maybe even at times you're just like, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Where's the money coming? Where am I going to live?
Yeah.
What am I going to do? And then all of a sudden you look back on it and you're like, I would not even be where I am right now.
Right.
Yeah, if it wasn't for that.
Right. And like that really always comes back to me if I always think things that sound really awful, but how can they lead you? Because you said nonlinear before.
Yeah.
That's the feminine. The feminine is, and we are all about the dark feminine, the nonlinearity,
Right.
the idea that life is cyclical,
Mhm.
life spirals. It's how we dance in curves. It's life is the same way, and it is. We are so, and I think this returns to your initial question. We have been so programmed to think in a more masculinized way, which is linear, which is you work your way up a ladder
Mhm.
and you just ascend and ascend and ascend and ascend, and things get better and better and better and better and better. And I think we've been taught that through religion, that if something's going wrong in your life, you haven't prayed hard enough.
Yep. Oh my gosh.
You something with the devil, something.
Yep.
Yeah. Where it's like, what? Like, how are you just always gonna like something's going wrong, you're the problem? Like, what?
Yeah, it's not real. I used to teach at San Francisco State, and
That's right.
I would have, these 18, 19-year-olds, like, people fresh out of high school, and they were coming into my classroom with like these preconceived notions of like how to exist and what steps they needed to take that were taught to them by their parents or their church or the media. And I would teach very early on in the semester a concept called chrononormativity, chrono being time and normativity being what is normal. And all of a sudden I'd start to see these light bulbs go off around like chrononormativity is telling you that you need to be in this classroom right now because you're 18 and you just graduated high school. Chrononormativity is telling you that you need to take that internship to get that job right after you finish in 4 years max. And then after that, you should probably get a partner and get engaged and then get married and then have a house and then have the babies. And like, there's all these steps. And the reason why we're all so stressed and upset is because that is not a realistic or reasonable expectation. It's okay if that's what happens for you. Like, awesome. I'm really glad if that works out and that's what you want for yourself. But for the vast majority of us, it's nonlinear. We're going to take a break off of college for a minute, or we're going to get laid off and have to pivot industries, or we're going to have a big painful breakup that sends me from California to Texas, and then I meet a witchy coven full of pole dancing witches. God had hoped that was going to happen to me, like, at all. But I think from to your point, at a very young age, we're taught that is how life is. It's very normative, and there's steps and milestones, and if you don't hit a milestone, something's wrong with you or you're doing something incorrectly. And it's just such a false narrative that we buy into. And that it's a false narrative that's also reinforced for us by everyone around us. Like, we don't have to buy into those things. And unfortunately, it takes until we're probably closer to our 30s where we're like, oh shit, there's more to life than just following those stepping stones.
Oh my gosh, that's so amazing that you taught that and brought that to their awareness, because when I actually I graduated from college and realized that what I wanted to do required another degree. And so I went back, and I was literally 3 years off from like the rest of my peers.
Yeah.
And you would have thought I was like 30 years off. I was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't follow the path. And yeah. So, you took like a 3-year where you like waitress and got the degree in the thing that you really wanted to do. Like, who gives a shit? But
yeah, trying to get through like community college in 2 years. And I was like behind in my math, and I'm like taking 4 classes in the summer so I could transfer and graduate in 4 years. Cause God forbid I take an extra semester or year or 2 years. Like, the stress on our poor bodies and minds. Oh my goodness.
And I love that there is a word for it. I had no idea. You're such a smarty pants.
Oh, thanks. So are you. I've learned so much being at the studio, and I think especially this concept of surrender has been a theme in the studio at various points and different themes of the month throughout the year.
Yeah.
You talk about it at one point, maybe it doesn't resonate super deeply, or maybe it does. And then, 3 months later, it kind of pops up again and it hits another level, and we just keep going deeper and deeper into the concepts. And life's going on. So our experiences, we have something to map it against. So we're like, oh, this is what it looks like in this context. And it starts to just add more color around it.
That's true, because I think also seeing spirituality and your witchcraft as a lifestyle, not a means to an end, is a big shift.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times we think, oh, I'm going to do this till I get this, and then I'll do it till I get this. But just being like, I don't have to constantly be on some kind of exact trajectory.
Yeah.
That's why, again, the dark feminine, we're
Mhm.
open. We're open to the mysteries of the universe, and also why we dance very serpentine and
Yes.
all of that, because we need to get our bodies and our nervous systems used to not being so linear. It sounds so silly and so trivial, but it really helps. And even the idea of how opposite it is to think always going up versus going within
Mhm.
sometimes, and like a spiritual practice I think that doesn't ask you to go within, that only asks you to go without and to listen and to trust others,
Mhm.
that doesn't require some kind of, personal gnosis and sovereignty, and really choosing
Yeah.
what resonates is problematic. And so that's a huge responsibility on people, to have to take that huge responsibility. Oh my gosh, I have to choose what my spiritual beliefs are.
Yeah.
Again, it's way easier to follow someone who says, follow me, do everything I said, and your life's going to be awesome.
Yep. And that's not even just for spirituality. That's, like I mentioned, the students that were coming into my classroom, they're like, my parents said this. And I'm like, that's cool. Why do they think that? Where did they learn it? What is that doing for you? Is that empowering you? Is that making you feel like you need to make a certain decision? And all of a sudden we start talking about critical thinking, and then applying critical thinking to spirituality. It feels very scary because there's so much to consider, but at the same time, you get to try things on. And like, does this fit? Does this resonate with me? Does this work? Or is there something else I want to lean into that might be different from what I'm used to? And I think that was another thing we talked about is, you join a community of people. Even at Minx and Muse, like, we all come in, we have different ways of thinking about things because we're not all thinking the exact same thing 24/7. But when you start to consider your path as non-linear, how do we cultivate a community that is supportive of questioning, is supportive of you having doubts, is supportive of you adding in new perspectives that maybe kind of take you away from maybe where you were 6 months prior? How do we cultivate a community that is really, really invested in allowing people to live that non-linear path?
Yes. And like, non-judgmentally, I think it's really important. I think, communities are rising up around, not, I think the old paradigm is like there was the guru and everyone followed and did what the guru did.
Mhm.
And now I think the paradigm shift, especially that we experience in witchcraft, is like there is not one hierarchy of like the priestess who tells everyone what to do.
Right.
One of our Minx Muse values is sovereignty, and that includes in like what you choose to believe and how you choose to practice.
Yeah.
And there's no way that you are going to find your authentic version of yourself, know thyself at a deep level,
Mhm.
which at what point is going to give you that inner peace of following your natural desires and path,
Yeah.
if you just let everyone else dictate to you what you should do and what you should believe. Like,
Absolutely.
because what's the whole point of this life, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not to avoid the pain, but it's able to like have a good old ride, and to really live feeling satiated that I did what I desired and I enjoyed this life,
Mhm.
and honoring the truths. But it's like so much of our spirituality and witchcraft is like stripping away what you said, the external
Yeah.
shoulds.
Shoulds, which is, at least in my view, like a lifelong activity that I'm doing. Like I like to think of myself as someone who is going to be constantly growing and questioning the things that I believe in. And while I might have like a strong view on this is how I think about X situation or thing today, I'm going to go through a lot of different things throughout my life. I might think differently about it in a year from now. And like, that's okay. I always want to have that critical mind, and I always want to be checking
Yes.
myself and feeling, does this resonate with me the same way? Or am I going
Yeah.
to calibrate it again? Am I going to add in something else? Am I going to consider a different perspective? Because who I am today is different than I was a year ago, from 3 years ago, 5 years ago. Using that logic, I'm probably going to
Yeah.
hear from.
If you just stall out and stop learning and stop growing and stop changing just directions, like that's why that was one of the main lessons of our June archetype of the month, the divine dualist.
Yes.
Being okay having dual perspectives on things,
Yeah.
and having we even talked about at one point in your life you had this belief system, now you have this. How can you reconcile both without the judgment of,
Yeah.
that was
There's some judgment from yourself. Like,
yeah, like
I've been preaching this, I've been living it.
yeah.
Now I'm unsure. So what have I done?
Yes, or like I'm inconsistent, or I didn't have the answer that I needed now back then. Like having some personal grace is so important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And yeah, and just to circle back again to your question about the nonlinearity. One other thing I would be remiss if I didn't bring up was, I think another thing that was really helpful for me was when it finally sunk in that there's not a right
Mm-hmm.
answer to live my life, and that everything else is wrong. I was always like, well, should I live here or here?
Just
And like guides will be like, I don't know, you can live here or here. Like, what the fuck? And like
astrocartography, like, where
yeah,
the stars say that I'm going to be the most happy in 6
right. And it's like, yeah, maybe you should listen to your astrocartography and live somewhere where the energy suits you. But it doesn't mean that if you don't choose that, you chose the wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that there's so much peace of being like, but wait, what's the right job? Is this the job I'm supposed to have? Is this the one? Is this the the roommate that I'm supposed to, or is it not? And
Yeah.
if it's not, if it's like, ooh, that's not a good match, that's where I think, our guides or spirits are here to support us and being like, do not get into that
Yeah.
situation. You will not be happy. But there's also the option of like, that job or that job or that job or that job would all be fabulous for you.
Yeah.
There is no final end that we think we're playing a game and we're trying to make all the decisions to get to that ultimate.
In this game, like, even if, to use your example, even if you didn't listen to the signs or your guide that said maybe not this roommate, even if you did say, I'm going to give this roommate a try, and it didn't work out, it doesn't work out. And then you figure out how to separate and move somewhere else, or they move out, and you move on with your life. Like, just no wrong decisions, just decisions.
I see so many people get so like asking their tarot cards, asking their pendulums, like trying to get signs on things where it's like they could both work.
Yeah.
What do you want? What is your telling you? Like there's that could work or that could work.
Yeah.
Because we're all just creating our life. And you know what? Maybe at one point this was a better option, but because you made some personal choices that didn't capitalize on it, it didn't end up being the best option. So it's like you still have to maintain your practice throughout. Like it's a lifestyle, and there is no like only one path that you could take. There are literally so many infinite timelines that you could. That's where I think the timeline thing comes from. It's like
cool to think about, where you're just like, well, if it's not working out on this timeline, I'm just gonna like mosey on over to this one over here.
Yes.
And see if that fits better. And I don't know, like, all of this really makes me think about just how we're being flexible in our spirituality and the decisions that we make for ourselves, and giving ourselves so much grace for the decisions that maybe don't work out, but are actually like the catalyst to get us to where we want to be. And I think maybe a bigger question around that, kind of harking back to what this original concept of nonlinear path is about, is how do we stay adaptable and flexible in our spiritual beliefs, but not feeling unanchored to something? Like, we want to feel rooted in our beliefs, but being open to things flexing. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think what we spoke about before is changing your perspective on what spirituality is, and that if we can see it as it's a tool versus it's the answer to avoiding any unsavory experiences is one way, because just that mindset shift right there can allow you to change complete perspective of what your spirituality is supposed to do for you. For sure. Also, I feel like there is times when if you're feeling super desperate around anything, taking a step back, because we know through witchcraft, desperation energy does not serve us.
And that's
It is the
usually
most
when we're like
repellent.
our tarot cards is because we're like, I need
Yep.
this, or I needed someone to tell me something, someone tell me what to do because I'm afraid I'm going to make the wrong decision.
And that's when you start finding yourself in that state of desperation, just remember your witchcraft 101, like attracts like. You are going to absolutely repel the universe around you by staying in that state. So maybe that's a time where you need to, instead of like doubling down on all your spirituality, maybe it's just remembering your spiritual lessons.
Yeah.
And, the final thing I want to say about this is that we always want to check our spirituality. And the way that I like to do that is this belief system or this modality or this practice, is it making me feel challenged in a way that's making me a better person? Or is it making me judge and loathe myself? Because I think there are so many practices that are irresponsibly making people think that they're inherently bad or wrong or sinful or the problem, instead of empowering them to think, this is something that's happening for me, not to me. I'm not an inherently bad person. I'm here to have grace for myself and make better decisions moving forward. Like, this is anything from there's different cults out there that will make you feel like you're worthless, and that you need to give your entire life over to some kind of spiritual master or Jesus or something, where it's like, you think about the Catholicism and like beating your, I forget the word when you're whipping yourself. Yeah, I forget. But that kind of thing, like, is it making you feel like you are an inherently bad person and problematic? Is it driving you down? Because if that's the case, that's someone trying to control you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or is it do something that makes you feel supported and loved despite the trials of life?
Yeah.
And in that case, to me, that's the kind of spirituality I want to be involved with. The one that does preach personal responsibility and having to do the work. But as you do it, it's not like, well, but I've been doing all this and my cat died. Like, did you think if you were doing it right, your cat wasn't going to die? Like, I don't understand. Like, these things are going to happen either way. So it's like, is your spiritual practice bringing out the best in you? Or is it making you feel subhuman, less righteous in yourself?
Yeah.
And if you are in one of those situations, even you see it in the spiritual community, oh, well, this happened to you. You must have done something to attract it.
Yeah.
Where it's like, that's not true. That's not because that person had free will and we can't control other people's free will.
Yeah.
So and to make it, victim shaming that you did something wrong to deserve that. Like, no, that to me, that's a disempowering spiritual practice. And so I think it's always important to look and say, hey, did I just enter into some kind of control mechanism that's not building me up? Or am I in something that's empowering me to walk this path in like the most empowered, loving, self-respecting for thyself and others way?
Yeah, I love that. It really makes me think about, a criteria that I will often use is like, do I feel like this is making me feel, is this person, is this content, is this practice, is this making me feel in control of myself? Or is this making me feel like I have to prove something to someone or something, whether that is a person in a cult or if it's, God or spirit themselves or itself. If I feel like I'm constantly trying to prove myself, or even when it comes to like spiritual lessons, oh, I did the thing and I should be rewarded because I didn't fall to temptation, and like, why am I not getting the things? If I feel like I'm constantly trying to prove something, and that could be to a job too. Now, a recent situation is feeling like I'm trying to like show up as like, I am the person. Why don't you believe that I'm the right person? That is a sign that there's some type of either spiritual bypassing going on, or I'm engaging with the things that are not right for me. It's not healthy for my spiritual development. And when it's not healthy for your spiritual development, it bleeds into like your everyday waking life. And that's when we have depression, or we don't trust ourselves, or we don't honor our boundaries. And it has this like domino effect into the rest of our lives. And I think when we can start to feel like if we're proving ourselves to a spirit or a job or a person, usually not the jam, usually not what we want to.
Right. Yes. If you feel like the sacrificial lamb, unless you can prove otherwise, it's like, does these people have your best interest in mind?
No, they usually don't. And that's back to what we were talking about. Then we can make a different decision. We're not stuck in that situation. And I know I'm guilty of feeling stuck in something where I'm like, well, there's this reason why I can't leave. Like I'll be alone, or I won't have the money, or this is a bad timing to do this thing. And you force yourself to fit into something that is literally not the right shape or size or environment for you. And I think once we let go of that feeling like we need to stick with something that is clearly not for us, that's when we open up the energy floodgates for something better to come through for us. And we have to trust that it's going to come through, because it doesn't come through overnight. And that's when we're like,
no,
where is it?
Yes, and that's where you're using your spiritual tools. And that's such an example of why we just had a workshop using esoerotic witchcraft to awaken your innate power, pleasure, and potential. And that was the potential part that I was hoping to hit home with people, that through, esoerotic witchcraft, as we do in the multiverse, that it's like, and at Minx, it's meant to open you to your endless potential, and your potential is infinite, because there is literally not just you had one opportunity, you fucked up.
Yeah, you don't get any more. Might as well just pack it up.
Yeah, that was it. Like, just leave it. And there's potential elsewhere. So like, but you need to recognize that there's endless potentiality in the world when you choose to show up in your power and you follow your pleasure. And that's really a part of the pleasure, is like, okay, but like, where's pleasure leading me now? Because that's my inner compass of like what I truly desire, versus the programming of like what I should do.
Yeah. And I think to that end, also letting go of what we think are the only options for us. Like you're talking about limitless potential.
Yeah.
We can't even fathom all of the potential, all of the options. Like I mentioned earlier, when I moved from California to Austin, and I was like, all right, well, I'm in my 30s, I have to go make new friends. Like, what am I going to do? And then end up at a witch pole dancing studio. Never could have made that up in my mind. Could not have thought that in years. And yet that is what happened. And it's because I said, you know what? I'm going to move. I'm just going to go out there. I'm going to see who I resonate with. I'm going to see who my people are. And I'm not going to be attached to a specific thing. And it brought me something literally magical.
Yes.
Magical coven of wonderful humans. And that is the power of letting go and not assuming that we know that that we know all the options out there for us, because we just don't.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I feel like that's the perfect way to wrap up the conversation, of like bringing it back to the beginning of like, you don't know all of the answers.
You don't.
And so
thing at the end of the day too.
Yeah. And that's a good surrender to have, of like, what if it could be better? What if this is happening for me? What if I just follow my pleasure? What if I allow for endless potentiality?
Yep, absolutely.
Yes. Oh, these were such great questions that you brought, and you brought so much wisdom. And that's how I really want these episodes to go, is like bringing the questions to start off the conversation, but then hearing your nuggets of wisdom, which you had a whole bucket of nuggets. So
a great series, because I know the witches in the studio and they're smart cookies. So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it. And I still want to end with the questions that I ask everyone though. So just to get to know you a little more. So Megan, what is your personal mantra or source of daily inspiration?
Oh, goodness. So when I was thinking about this, For me, it's not like I wake up and I have something that I say to start the day, but I have two things that I keep in mind and often find myself saying every day. And it depends on the situation. But one is if I'm really wanting something or yearning for something or working towards something and it's not happening, I say, if the answer is not no, it's yes, not yet, or something better. Brings me back to being feeling grounded. Like, it's okay because the answer is not no. It's not yet or something better.
I love
Other
that.
thing is if something's not going real well and I'm feeling stressed or I'm kind of like forgetting myself a little bit, I always like to say, you know what? I'm on a floating rock in space. This shit does not matter. It's okay.
Oh my gosh, that perspective is always so helpful to be like, oh my gosh, will you calm your tits down?
It just adds a little bit of levity to things that feel really all consuming. And it's not to say that some things aren't serious things that we need to contend with, but at the end of the day, we're on a floating rock.
Right.
We'll figure it out.
Right. I love that. That's wonderful. And what is your favorite sensuous indulgence?
Oh, crimson. So as a very, very much so a Taurian babe over here, God, I'm sitting here thinking like, how do I add all the senses in all at one time? There's not like one sense that I'm trying to, inspire. So for me, if I'm painting the picture, it's when I'm in a nice long caftan that feels really soft and luxurious, and I'm wearing fun earrings or jewelry, and I'm in the kitchen barefoot cooking. There's music playing. I'm tasting foods. I'm drinking wine. So literally like everything all at once, all the indulgences all at the same time.
Most wonderfully Taurus answer ever. I knew you weren't gonna let me down on this one. And then what does living fully in your power as a witch look like to you?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head earlier when you said it, but as a sovereign being, it's really comes down to being the energy that controls the energy. And you said it earlier, it's not about controlling other people's energy, but by controlling our own. And I find that if I'm in control of my energy, usually other people are like, oh, wait, you're not as activated or you're not as freaked out, or like all of a sudden you start to see energy kind of like permeate the room. The whole idea of like, you can cut tension with a knife. Tension's a feeling. There's a reason. So if you can control yourself, you can control so many other things around you. And that is ultimate sovereignty to me, is controlling myself and knowing that I am the maker of my life and my journey.
I love it. I love it. Megan, thank you. I just love you. I adore you so much.
Thank you, Crimson. Oh,
I love being on this journey with you. You are bringing so much magic to the world. So thank you for coming on and talking with me. And I hope everyone enjoyed our conversation. And I'm just going to do a shameless plug. Join us over in the multiverse if you want to do this immersion. If this resonated of like, oh, it is a lifestyle. Okay, it is something that I need to cultivate like intentionally. Join us in our virtual online membership, the multiverse. And wishing everyone a magical morning, day, night, whenever you're checking this out. Thank you, Megan.
thank you.
Thank you for joining me for the Minx and Muse podcast. You can find show notes and learn more about the studio at www.minxandmuse.com. As a reminder, it is our birthright to transform, expand, and safely exist as sensual, conscious, and empowered creatures. I'll see you next time.